The mic is still working.
And we're live. Hey guys, Dave from Nerdarchy, for nerds by nerds, hanging out with Nate the Nerdarch and Boris today. I asked Boris to come on because he's been a huge contributor to the Nerdarchy community for as long as I can remember. Like, if I think back, there's like 3 screen names that I can remember, and it's like Mike Gould, Boris Strumlin, and Goblin Nerd. And you and Mike Gould are still around, and you guys leave these very, very long, in-depth comments that are always very insightful and sometimes a little intimidating.
That's not on purpose. It's just a default setting.
Well, and that's fine. I always joke with the guys. I'm like, why does Boris watch us? Because just by reading your comments, I'm like, this guy is super intellectual and super smart, and we must be like goldfish brains to him.
I wouldn't say that. I mean, I wouldn't have stuck with you as long as I did.
But got some insight somewhere.
And you know what, the thing is, like, I say that tongue in cheek, but we have a very diverse fan base, which is awesome, and which we greatly appreciate. And we do seem to attract a lot of guys that are like older, like us, which is really cool.
I think that's part of it. Yeah,
it's the old guy. It's the old guy vibe. But yeah,
it's the old guy vibe, and yeah, and you don't get that everywhere.
That is true. Like, and that's one of the things. Like when we went on the Geek and Sundry thing with the GM test, was like one of the things missing was grognards. They just don't really have many of them on there. Everyone is kind of like hip and young, and even if they're not young, they just seem younger because they're like all the LA crowd.
Right. Yeah. So we've got the old guy vibe and the East Coast vibe,
and also, like, it goes to show too, like, the diversity of the hobby and how it appeals to, you know, all walks of life. You're a college professor, yeah, and you know, in our own game, we have, you know, a doctor that plays. We have a bunch of fans that are lawyers, but then you also have college kids and construction workers. So it truly like runs the gamut.
Well, I mean, I think if you teach college, you do have this kind of desire to hang out with a lot of people that are significantly younger than you. And I think that translates into the gaming world as well. And I mean, if you have a community that's this diverse and that has people of different generations, I think that's also part of the attraction to your guys' thing.
So how long have you been gaming now?
I started in 1981. With first edition, so I still think of it as my edition, even though I generally play 5th now.
Nice. Do you play any? Do you go back to the old editions at all?
I haven't. When I was looking for a group, when I restarted playing a few years ago, I found these guys that were playing some sort of OD&D hack, and I came there. I played with them once, and I really couldn't figure out why they were using a lot of the old rules. I mean, I know that there are certain things about 5th that I don't like and that other people don't like, but I guess just going back to the really old basic rules interspersed with some other additions here and there, it didn't really make much sense to me. So no, I haven't really played 1st or the older edition since then.
So are you playing, how many games are you playing in currently?
I am playing, I guess I'm doing 2 settings, and I think they both have 2 sets of players. So I guess it's sort of 4, but sort of 2.
Cool. So
I was playing in a game for a while, but it was having scheduling issues, and I couldn't commit to showing up to a game that was only being run, you know, once every 2 months. So I dropped out of that.
I definitely understand that, especially being of the old guy crowd. It gets harder and harder to schedule things at times. So what do you think the appeal to you is for 5e?
I really like the backgrounds because I really like characters that are grounded in a setting. I mean, since you read my comments on your YouTube channel, you know that's my main thing. Attractive settings, interesting settings that kind of make sense and that have some sort of internal or logical coherence. So characters that are grounded in a world as opposed to just people who are completely murder hoboing out. I like most of the classes and most of the archetypes, so that was definitely a welcome change from the previous edition, which didn't really have that at all. And the layout is pretty attractive. I mean, I don't talk about art that much, but I mean, it definitely draws people in, even people who've been around the block a few times.
But art sells products. If you don't have good art, people aren't likely to even pick the books up.
Yeah, but I mean, the main thing that kind of got me back into playing was my kids were digging around the house one day and they found an old dice bag of mine. And I'd actually sold off all of my stuff, and this was the only remaining thing. It was kind of like, the hand of Vecna sitting around in the basement. And they came to me and they said, "What's this?" And I started telling them, and I said, "Well, let's try it out." And this is before 5th came out. So we kind of messed around with 4th. It was a little bit clunky, even though we had fun. And then when 5th came out, I bought it, and we've been running it with it ever since. So yeah, one of my groups is just kids, and I've actually kind of got my wife to play occasionally, which was a big accomplishment on my part.
Every gamer that ever has that happen pretty much says the same thing when they get their spouse to play. Even like Seth Pulaski of Dice and Men, he says, I get this quote is going to be a little bit off, but the paraphrase: if nothing else happens from making that movie, my wife now plays D&D and is a gamer. It was worth it.
Yeah, I mean, now I have something to put on my headstone. It's probably my biggest accomplishment in life.
And not just that, it's just always cool to have people to share the things you're passionate with and the things you enjoy. And even if she doesn't play all the time, at least she's taken an interest enough to try it out and plays once in a while. So that's cool in itself.
Yeah, definitely.
And so what are the age ranges of the kids you're playing with?
So my kids are 16 and 11, and they're actually I told them about a month ago, why don't you try to run a game yourselves? Actually, my youngest one has. She designed a game based on the werewolf card game, where you try to figure out who the werewolf is.
Yeah.
And especially for someone that young, she did a pretty good job playing with me and some of her friends. And my older daughter, they're both girls, she is working on a setting set in a Victorian insane asylum, so that promises to be pretty interesting too. Their cousins come over to play, and they're kind of similar range, 10 to 15. So yeah, those are mostly the kids, and it's a pretty different experience than running with adults, obviously. But it's a lot of energy, and it's a lot of attempts to get people to put butts in seats and to stop trying to kill each other and the NPCs. But well, I mean, you've been there.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, we've done a few videos on this, and it's always a great topic to bring up when we do have someone who can add some insight. What would you say to people that you're trying to game with kids or get their kids the game? Hide a bag of dice in your basement somewhere, and maybe
hide a bag of dice in your basement. A lot of animal critters. So animal familiars, always a big sell. I guess do make sure to have significant amounts of combat. It's not for everyone, and I actually don't have that much combat when I play with adults, but with kids, you kind of have to throw it in just to keep their attention focused. What else? My kids go through my monster menu and pick out all the cute monsters, and their ideas of cute are very strange. They're into the Nothic. They think it looks like a cute hedgehog. So my younger daughter's actually getting to be a pretty good drawer, and she draws these Nothics with the giant eyeball and the teeth. And what else did they like? They like the Slod. Again, very strange taste and cuteness.
And these are the cute monsters to them.
Yeah, these are the cute monsters. But I remember the first time we played, I stole an NPC from the 3 introductory module. There was that kobold named Meepo.
Yeah.
And before that, my youngest daughter was kind of resistant, and you kind of had to drag her out and get her to the table. But as soon as Meepo came in, that's what sold her on the game. And if anything, she's probably the more gung-ho of my two kids now.
We've heard a ton of great stories about Meepo, making an appearance and how it influences the players in the game and affects the characters in the game. It just goes to speak to like how powerful a good NPC is when you introduce it into your game. And most of the time it's not going to be the NPC you think it's going to be. They're just going to latch onto whatever.
Right.
So you do have a Russian themed fantasy setting you've been working on?
Yeah, I guess that's kind of my main project. I'm trying to finish this player's handbook type thing, which is setting specific with somewhat distinct classes and races and backgrounds and equipment lists and such. So hopefully I'll be done in the next couple months if work doesn't get me down too much.
That sounds ambitious.
Yeah, I'm about halfway done. Or probably more. I'm just transcribing stuff from the document that I already have to what's the online platform that everyone's using to make it look like 5e stuff?
Homebrew. Yeah,
Homebrew.
So what are the selling points of the campaign you're running now? I know you have a couple of articles up on Blogspot.
I guess the selling points are, the main selling point, especially for people who don't know much about Russian folklore and Russian mythology, is Baba Yaga. So that's the one thing that everyone knows. So Baba Yaga or Baba Yaga is she's essentially a pagan deity that's kind of survived in this monstrous guise after the coming of the new religion. So I have this very lightly disguised Orthodox Christianity in the game. And Baba Yaga is still kind of in the background pulling strings. She's in control of fate. And she's actually kind of actively conspiring to keep the old gods from coming back, because the old gods, even though she's one herself, didn't do a very good job in running the world. So the party that currently plays in this setting, the adult party, not the kid party, they're actually working for Baba Yaga, but they don't really know what exactly she's up to. They just know that she's this font of wisdom and she controls the access point to this other world, this other plane that's kind of parallel to the normal world, the material plane. So they're uncovering these ancient secrets, and they're uncovering the presence of these other deities that are at each other's throats, and trying to figure out how they're going to survive as freaks in a world that has kind of moved on and adopted this new culture and new religion. So, but I mean, there's a lot of creatures. There's a lot of kind of goblin type monsters. Some of them live in the forest, some of them live in the field, some of them live in the barn, and they're always kind of there, and aspects of the old world are kind of always poking through. So I guess it's the juxtaposition of worlds that's the main thing.
So Zarif Gaming has a question, and I don't know if you guys have spoken or not, because I'm not familiar with it, but are you going to do a Kosh the Deathless theme NPC?
Yes. So he's one of the other major NPCs. He's kind of he's been in the background up until now. But so if you know anything about Russian history, the main event in the Middle Ages is the invasion of the Mongols. So the Mongols actually conquered Russia and ruled it for over 200 years. And in this fantasy setting, he's kind of the leader of these nomadic invaders. And he's not really interested in wealth. He's interested in hiding away his Horcrux and making sure that no one finds it and keeping the land disunited. They don't know this yet, but he's definitely one of the major NPCs. So yeah, the big three are Baba Yaga, Kosh the Deathless, who's essentially the Slich, and the Gorinich Serpent, who is this three-headed dragon. And they're kind of contesting the world between the three of them. It's this three-cornered struggle.
So, are you using Atoma Beast at all?
I have looked at it. I'm not entirely happy with the way that they've statted the creatures. I like the art again, and I like the fact that they're trying to bring Russian mythology, Slavic mythology in. But I guess my take on the Tome of Beasts is that a lot of it is just too inflated. I mean, they take the Rusalka, which is kind of this Russian cross between a nymph and a mermaid, and they give her something like 10 or 15 hit dice, something crazy. And I usually run low-level games, so it's just too much for me.
Yeah, someone actually asked, Jake Kawhi asked, Tome of Beast did good by Baba Yaga with her huntsman.
Those I like. That's actually the main thing that I like about the Slavic themed creatures in that book, and those I think I'm going to use.
I like the Tome of Beast. I also felt like a lot of the stats and things were a bit inflated.
Yeah, I remember you guys said that in your review when you first reviewed it.
Like all, you know, so many of the tiny and small monsters have like ridiculously, they're all like jacked. So, and like, sure, that could be a thing some of the time, but it seemed like consistently high.
Yeah, I mean, they have this basic creature called Domavoy. Domavoy is basically the Russian kobold. I mean, it's essentially the same creature because Russian mythology, European mythology is of a piece. So, I mean, you figure, you know, a kobold in 5th edition has what, 2d4? And this thing has some ridiculous amount of hit dice. I mean, this is something that, in principle, you can find in any peasant's hut.
And it can murder everybody in the hut.
It can murder everyone in, you know, within the 10-kilometer range or something like that.
So it should be on the kobold power level instead.
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess that's the other thing. I tend to enjoy the low-level game a lot more than the high-level game, because with the high-level game, you're dealing much more with, you know, moving pieces around on a grid. It's a lot more tactical combat, whereas the low-level game, at least to me, seems more open-ended, more geared toward role-playing, more geared toward exploring the world.
So what kind of backgrounds are you coming up with? I know I've seen at least one of them you had dropped in the Company of the Nag group.
So I actually like, you know, the more mundane they are, the better. One of the better ones I wrote is just a peasant. And a peasant is not exactly a folk hero. The peasant is just someone who comes from the village. They're usually fairly conservative and fairly xenophobic. They like to gossip. They like to stab their neighbors in the back if it's advantageous to them. And so I compiled these lists of personality traits and ideals and bonds and flaws. And they just spoke to me a lot louder than folk heroes did, just because, I don't know, I mean, normal people attract me a lot more than kind of these heroes writ large. So I have peasants, I have one for the urban poor, I have vagabonds, which I'm actually kind of surprised aren't included in the standard, you know, 5e background package. Healers, you know, just kind of village wise woman that cures wounds, helps deliver children, brews love potions, and dispenses curses, and works as a midwife.
Nice. I got distracted by the chat there. They say you need a Russian dwarf for me.
Uh,
And they also said that that we need to be made into dwarves, and I'm like, well, we were already made into dwarves, and you know, through Arknight with the Dungeon Crate.
Well, so I guess I have 3 basic types of non-human creatures as far as races or kinds, as I call them. On the one hand, they're the changelings, and the changelings are children of unions between humans and these goblin type of things that live in the hut and in the barn and in the surrounding fields and in the forests. So a more classic kind of changeling type, where, you know, this fairy type creature has offspring with humans and then steals the human child because it's useful to them somehow, and they place this changeling into the human household. So it's these kind of demi-humans, and they're somewhat chaotic, somewhat goblin-y. I guess some of them may be somewhat like dwarves in their argumentativeness, maybe. So that's one type of creature. The second type of creature is the shape changer, which I mean, they're essentially like talking animals, but talking animals / lycanthropes. So they can take hybrid form, they can use weapons in their hands, they have some magical ability, and if they get away from human society, they actually regain their immortality if they live with their shape-changing ancestors out in the woods or mountain fastnesses somewhere. And there's, foxes and wolves and cats, frogs, also very attractive to kids if you play with kids, animal things. And then there are sort of somewhat more classic D&D type creatures. There's one which is kind of a fair folk, which incorporates aspects of elf, gnome, and dwarf. They live underground, so they're kind of like the children of the forest from Game of Thrones. I guess that's the closest parallel. Then there's a kind of giant, very similar to the Goliath. And then there are these dog-headed creatures, which are a little bit like gnolls.
So all of that is from Russian folklore?
Yeah. I didn't invent any of them. I just gave them stats.
So is that what you teach, or is it just what you're interested in?
It's what I'm interested in. I've taught something sort of close to it on a couple of occasions, but yeah, my teaching is pretty haphazard. Right now, I'm teaching American government an introduction to sociology, which doesn't really impinge on my gaming very much. Although, yesterday when I was in class, I brought 2 dice with me, and I rolled on the attendance table to call on people who never talk. So, yeah, I'm working that into, I guess, my professional life.
Nice. We will game at work one way or another.
Exactly. Yeah.
Awesome. So how does your adult group, how do they feel about playing in your world? I mean, they haven't quit, so that's a good sign. What kind of feedback do you get?
They're into it. I mean, most of the people I play with, I've known for a very long time, and I've played with for a very long time, and they sort of know all my quirks and hang-ups. So yeah, I mean, they take me as I come, and they stick with me. They generally like the story, and I usually throw in a lot of intrigue, whether it's political intrigue or intrigue between gods. So I get pretty good feedback with regard to that. I pick up some people here and there from Roll20, from the NAG list, and I guess especially some of the younger people that come in, sometimes they're not crazy about the gritty way I run the game. I had one guy who was playing this wolf shape changer ranger, and in one of the first combats he was dropped, and since I used lingering injuries, he actually ended up losing an arm. And I mean, I was going to give him the option of finding there's this mythical item called the Water of Death, which actually helps limbs regenerate, but he, after that, wasn't really interested in recovering his arm. He kind of gave up on the whole game, and pretty soon he dropped out. But I mean, this is how I'm going to run the game. This is actually the one thing about 5e that I'm not crazy about, the fact that you can kind of laugh off damage.
Yeah, it's a bit on the video game side when it comes to damage and healing.
Exactly, and I mean, this is one aspect of the older, grittier, AD&D style game that I bring in.
Well, that's the kind of like the great thing about the hobby is we can play it however we want to. So, whether you want a grittier game or, or the way it's kind of set up now, you can customize it and make it your game.
Yeah, and I agree. I mean, I think people should run the game however they want. And in general, I mean, if I'm playing in someone else's game and they want to run it more gritty or less gritty than the way I do it, that's fine. I mean, as long as their setting is interesting to me, I'm fine with it. And the thing that I don't get is how much energy people spend arguing about how the game should be.
No, I totally understand that. I definitely agree with you. Like, I will play in all kinds of different games, but when you're GMing, you should run the game you want to run. We literally got an email today. It's like, our GM doesn't like this. They want to do this. They want to do that. Blah blah blah. How do I convince them? I'm like, You've all talked to them, right? Yes. You don't. You can't. Like, move on. Either accept or move on. You've got like two choices here.
Yeah, and I mean, this is actually one of the main things that I like about you guys. You're very therapeutic in the way that you approach interpersonal conflict at the table. And most of your advice makes a lot of sense to me. I mean, just talk to each other and develop some modicum of trust. I mean, if you don't trust your DM, it doesn't matter if their world is interesting. It doesn't matter if they're lenient. It doesn't matter if you like them personally. If you don't trust them, it's not going to work. So yeah, just talk to one another and establish some sort of common understanding.
Let's see. There's a question here.
While you're finding the question, one of the things I find difficult with dealing with people, we deal with so many people, is that they do come about with that argument of, I have to show them that my way is the correct way to play. And that I think that comes from the idea that, you know, a lot of people have in their minds is, if you're choosing something else, why are you choosing it? What's wrong with my thing? And
I don't have a problem with people choosing something else. I mean, people should play with the people that they want to play with, and people should play the style that they want to play with. But I'm willing to, you know, cut corners and make compromises here and there. But I mean, I've been playing for a long time. In some ways, I am set in my ways, and I will run my game the way that I see fit. And, you know, I will try to accommodate you to the degree that I think is fair and reasonable. And beyond that, I mean, if you don't want to play, then that's fine.
Yeah, not everybody's going to want to play in everybody else's game.
Exactly. And that's how it should be.
Yeah, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. So Kyle Ellis, one of my players wants the human culture he's from to be based on a communist Russian uprising. How do you have rewards in that setting?
How do you have rewards in that setting? Or, I don't know. I mean, in general, I don't think D&D is that well suited for modeling modern type settings. But, I mean, communist Russia was part of the world in which we live. People were certainly motivated by money. People were certainly motivated by jealousy. I mean, you look at the Great Purges. Why did people rat out their neighbors? Well, because they coveted their apartment. They coveted their job. So, I mean, a lot of the same motivations that motivate people in any other modern setting or any other non-modern or fantasy setting would be appropriate in a game set in communist Russia. I mean, what else are people motivated by? People are motivated by ideology. So, I mean, they're people who are true believers, and they think that, you know, all heretofore existing history is the history of class struggle, and that the kulaks and the bourgeoisie and the nobility need to be overthrown, and that they need to level society and make it classless. People are motivated by obedience to various leader types. So, I mean, that's quite a few motivations there.
So Zaref Gaming, fun fact, I'm 4th generation Eastern European American, so talking about Slavic mythology is very soothing to me. Well, you know, here on Nerdarchy, we try to cover a lot of different bases.
Yeah, I mean, Slavic mythology, people don't really know that much about it because pagan Slavic culture was not a literate culture, so there isn't really a lot of solid evidence about what the religion was like. And when folklore specialists in the 19th century began writing about it, they began writing about it on the basis of what they knew about, for example, Greek mythology or Norse mythology, where there was significantly more documentation. So they would look at these different gods and they would say, well, you know, Perun is the god of the sky. He hurls thunderbolts, so therefore he must be a lot like Zeus and Thor. Was he like this in reality? Nobody knows. But in what was written down in the written mythology that developed after the 19th century, a lot of these parallels kind of became set in stone. And today, actually, when I'm working on this setting and I'm looking at materials I can use online, a lot of this stuff is written by these weird neo-pagans, some of them who sort of shade off into various very, very strange neo-Nazi movements because there was always kind of this connection between neo-paganism and neo-Nazism. And in Russia, it is particularly strong. So when I'm using this material, I do have to be very, very careful to avoid getting into politics that I personally find kind of distasteful.
I think that goes without saying for any RPGs or even polite society as a whole.
Yeah, and I mean it's weird if you just look at the history of D&D in general. There was this kind of intertwined neo-pagan movement. A lot of the early gamers, there was this sort of Norse pagan proto-fascist cult, even around a lot of the elite Eastern universities where D&D first arose. And I used to hang out with some of those people, and they definitely kind of rubbed me the wrong way. But actually, I mean, since I'm talking about the old days, and since you guys asked me when I started playing, so here's my big claim to fame. The guy who actually taught me how to play D&D was James Wyatt.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so we went to the same junior high and high school, and he drew me in and he introduced me. And so we played together for a couple of years in like 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th grade.
He inducted you. You guys sacrificed to go together, and now you play D&D.
That's right. Yeah. And then I stopped playing for a while, and I was just shocked to learn that he was the lead design guy in a lot of the 3rd and 4th edition stuff.
Oh yeah, that is pretty cool. It's that's one of the cool things about doing Nerdarchy is we get to we're starting to meet and interact with these people that we kind of looked up to when we were playing the game like 10 years ago, 20 years ago at this point. Yeah,
or if you discover that they used to be just regular guys that you used to hang out with in the basement.
How could this happen? So yeah. Brian has it's more of a general question, and we could all probably weigh in on. I have a question. I'm running the Lost Mines of Phandelver, and it sucks. I want to change the campaign. Should I work that into the story or just abandon the campaign completely and start afresh? I'll kick it off and then pass it to you guys. I would actually just talk to my players and see what they want to do. Like, do they want what's already happened to be incorporated into the campaign and stay there, or are they okay with a reset button? Either one of them is fine, just as long as everybody at the table kind of sees eye to eye and wants the same thing.
Yeah, I like Lost Mines. I think it's one of the better adventures that they've published for this edition. And back when I first started playing just with the kids, I picked up the box set and I looked at it, and of course I immediately started changing stuff because this is what I do. So I took the Sword Coast, I reoriented it. In other words, the coast was, or the sea was now to the east of the coastline rather than to the west, and I set it into this this other world. So the kids' characters were new arrivals in this newly discovered continent, and they ended up in Phandalin, and instead of fighting ruffians that had taken over the town, the main evil character, what the hell was his name, Glassstaff, he was part of this sort of elven secret society, which was dedicated to the discovery of the past of this new continent, which apparently had been settled by elves before. So I ran with the map and I ran with a lot of the encounters, but I completely changed the valence. But I mean, I think if people want to do that, people want to put their own spin on published adventures, that's probably the best way to go. Just make it yours. But I mean, in general, I'm pretty happy with the introductory adventure.
The thing that I've heard over and over about it, that it's pretty hard for an intro adventure. Andrew Armstrong from Dawnforge Cast is writing his own intro adventure, not because he thinks that Mines of Phandelver is a bad adventure, but because he doesn't think it's a good introductory to a game system.
That cave complex encounter with Clarg the Bugbear, I think, especially for novice players, that's a meat grinder. So yeah, in that respect, I agree. And when my kids were playing with it, I kind of let them smoke out all of the creatures by blocking their chimney, and that's the only way that they were able to win. And I think I had an NPC advising them. He kind of pitched this idea to them. Otherwise, I fear that they would have ended up dead.
It would have been a bloodbath.
It would have been pretty bad.
You know, and do you want to weigh in on that one, Nate?
Yeah. From what I found is when I played in Horde of the Dragon Queen, and I don't know if it's like that for the rest of them, but it's tough. The combat is tough, and there's a lot of combat. So I found that if I was going to run that same adventure that I had played in for Horde of the Dragon Queen, I was going to cut out some of the combats, or definitely, like you're saying, Boris, have another idea on how they could solve the problem without trying to just slog through all the people.
Yeah, and I mean, if you think about it, people sneaking into that cave complex, it would be really difficult to remain unnoticed. Like, yes, there's that waterfall that kills a lot of the incidental noise, but still, I mean, those goblins have to be really, really stupid to let people just sneak in there unmolested.
The one thing I will say, guys, like if you're looking for specific advice on pre-written adventures and modules, like Nerdarchy is the worst place to come, because as we've said over and over again, we collect them, but we don't really run them. You know, we might like peruse them and we
snag stuff out of it,
steal stuff out of them, but we don't run them. So like if there's specific things going on that you want to know about, then you're not, you know, you're probably not going to get that information, you know, from our channel. Specifics, you know, more general stuff, sure, we can help you with, or even asking, like someone had asked what's our favorite all-time adventure, and I don't think I've ever run a pre-written adventure. I've played in a couple, but you know, I've never run them, and because I don't run them because I'm like you, Boris, I'd be like, okay, I have to rewrite this and make it my own, and I'm like, that is way more work than me just writing something.
You know, since you're bringing it up, I am actually currently running an old module. If you remember the U series, the Sinister Secret of Saltmarsh, and it had 2 sequels. So it starts out with this haunted house that turns out to actually be a base for these smugglers. So I remember I used to run it a lot when I was a kid and I was playing first edition. And I brought it back just to see how it would work, because I remember someone on the NAG list was running it. So that kind of put the idea in my head that I should run it too. And I remember it being very well written and very engaging and very interesting and kind of like this BBC mystery. And when I started running it, I realized how many logical holes there were in the construction of the adventure. Like, the party comes into the house, the smugglers are kind of in the basement, and they're lying low and they're hoping that they don't get discovered. But they're also not aware of the presence of the players, you know, in the upper parts of the house. And then there's this assassin that's placed in there by the guy who doesn't want the PCs to figure out that this house is being used as a smuggling base. But he doesn't know where the smugglers are in the house. And I'm thinking, you know, this doesn't really make any sense at all. So I'm running this thing, and I'm kind of rewriting the plot as I'm running it. And I'm thinking this would be so much easier if I wrote this adventure from the get-go, because I would have thought this through.
Right, because now you have to fill the plot gaps. Now, that being said, like that can be interesting in and of itself, and then you can specifically tie those specific things to your game world.
And I do, but I feel like I'm using more energy than if I had just written it myself.
Well, and that falls back to like my whole point from the
right.
beginning, is like, for me to read everything and then go, how am I going to customize this? I could have literally just ran off the cuff or pre-written something.
Right.
I mean, I pretty much run the Scarlet Sisterhood almost solely off the cuff. Occasionally, I might have an idea of something I might want to happen, but you know, they're all over the place anyway, so that can change.
Well, I mean, those are good players to have, because first of all, they're really motivated to go out and find something to do. And secondly, they are pretty united in the sense that if one of them decides to do something, they're all willing to follow along and find in-character reasons to do so. So, I mean, those are ideal players to have.
It is probably, sorry, Nate, it is probably one of my favorite groups to run for.
Yeah.
It's one of my favorite groups to watch.
Yeah, definitely.
They've quickly gone to the top of my list. And not only that, too, this is the first game I've run weekly in years. I don't even know how long it's been. Because me and Ted, we've been running our game and flipping back and forth, but we only run it once a month.
Right.
So it's been a long time since I've run a weekly game, and these guys just make it so easy. I'm like, I feel like I don't even need to be there. Like, it would run itself.
And Dave, you don't have to apologize. I'm not in any of your games currently, so
There you go.
it's fine that that's your favorite game to run in.
So we are like almost 45 minutes into this thing. We might as well bust out a roll call, people. I know we got Australia and New Mexico in the house. I definitely saw that, and Washington, because you guys are on here so often. I'm actually learning where you're from. I feel a little stalkerish. Because we got Friganator, he's in Washington. We've got Tesmic. I know Tesmic's an Australian. Oh, Jay Kawhi. We got Japan in the house. Thomas is in Norway. And we got Jersey in the house with Crunchy Frog. I like that screen name. Patrick's in Sweden. We missed you yesterday, Patrick. AJ is in Lopez Island, Washington. We got Ghetto Boy Pez in Washington State. We got New Mexico. That's Zarf Gaming. Minnesota is David Henson. We got Corin in the UK. Bunions and Dragons is in Michigan. Minnesota with Evil Silly Putty. We got Menzo Baranza and Underdark with Hooten. I suspect in Menzo Baranza, they're going to restrict your internet access. So you might have trouble getting Nerdarchy through over there. We've got Michigan with Jake. New York City with League Science.
Did the Drow Elves hack our election?
Maybe. We've got One Lazy Guy is in Western Australia. We've got Boston in the house with Kevin. Regilio is in Utah. Scott is in Wisconsin. We've got Argentina in the house with Ace Guerra. I'm probably butchering that for sure. Arkansas is in the house with Josh. We've got Tier Odin is chiming in from West Australia as well. What's up, Tier Odin? And we've got Nebraska with John. We've got Cannibal Loco in Argentina. We've got Pata in Czech Republic. Santa Cruz, California with Nerd Dragon 88. And I wonder if there used to be Nord Dragon 88. There's a Nord Dragon that hangs out here too. We've got I lost my place. Happens. Janatla's Cube is the Canadian cube. Arkansas with the Inner Plains. Lincoln in Sweden. Kenneth in North Carolina. So we got people popping in from all over the place. Definitely appreciate you guys. Hey, Jinker GM.
And I think you missed John from Granite City, Illinois.
It's a strong possibility. So thanks for the catch, Nate. Oh, Sugar Island, Texas. Idaho is in the house as well. Sugar Island is Kelsey, the man from the road. The man from road to farm, Idaho. Oh, okay. So One Lazy Guy, can you tell us some more about the new Slavic class options? And also,
yes. So some of the classes that I use aren't really altered at all from the standard 5e write-up. The bards I pretty much use as is. The only thing I do is I kind of define how the archetypes actually fit into the world. So the Valor Bard is kind of this this type of bard that mostly performs for the nobility and sings about, you know, the deeds of great warriors. Whereas the Knowledge Bard is actually a pagan priest in disguise. And they travel from village to village, and they put on these shows to entertain the peasants, you know, complete with sort of jugglers and clowns and dancing bears. But they're actually keeping the old ways and the old knowledge alive. So the church isn't really terribly in favor of that. Aside from that, I have Warlocks and Sorcerers with a few new archetypes written in. I have Rogues, I think, with one new archetype, and Rangers with one or two. But the new ones are, so there's this character called the Bagatir, and he's kind of like this fighter superhero with superhuman strength. The Paladin doesn't quite fit into this setting, so this character kind of takes his place, and he performs feats of strength. Moist Mother Earth allows him to kind of mow through ranks and ranks of enemies. The Cossack is another archetype of this class. Then I have the Fool, which is a lot of fun. They're somewhat like Chaos Sorcerers. So they're characters, and it's not really clear whether they're stupid, insane, or just kind of malingerers that are making fun of people, jesters. They have some spell abilities, but they also accumulate paradox, kind of like in the White Wolf mage game, if they bend luck too much. So they kind of start out with the lucky feat. So that's kind of a fun character class, even though it's a little bit difficult to play. And then I have a priest, which is kind of like a cleric without armor and weapons. More standard kind of medieval Orthodox or Catholic Church type priest or monk, but not monk in the Kung Fu sense. So these are the three new classes that I designed. And then some of the classes I kind of push to the margins. I don't forbid people from playing them. A lot of the magic is performed by people who are illiterate. And I mean, most people in society are illiterate. So they're wizards, but they tend to come from foreign lands. There are paladins, but they also tend to come from foreign lands. And I don't really have anything against the barbarian class as a whole being in D&D, but I don't really see it as fitting in this setting. So I just kind of got rid of it, and I gave the D12 hit die to this Bagatir superhero fighter.
So you merged the paladin and barbarian into a kind of like a new class?
Yeah, more or less.
So what did you replace weapons and armor with for the
weapons and armor are pretty much standard. The only thing is that there's no plate armor, because plate armor isn't really around, or it's super, super expensive because it's coming from abroad. So it's basically just chain and various reinforced kinds of chain that it's equivalent to bandit and splint mail. The weapons are pretty much standard. I replaced the rapier, which doesn't really fit period-wise, with the saber. And I made the saber a finesse weapon so that rogues could use it and do sneak attacks with it. And also because, the scimitar was cut down to D6 damage, because they wanted all the Drizzt fanboys to use 2 of them. The scimitar, in I think virtually all of the other editions, was a D8 weapon, so I kind of restored that to the saber. And really, the main other thing that I threw in is the bardiche, which is actually kind of a later weapon from the 16th century, whereas my world is more of a kind of 14th century model. But I mean, whenever you see pictures of these kind of guards guarding the Tsar's palace and they're holding these pole axes, that's the bardiche, and that's one of the things that my blog is named after: bathhouses and bardiches. So the bardiches are there as a stand-in for the swords, and the bathhouses are in there as a stand-in for the sorcery, because the bathhouse is the place where a lot of people learn to cast spells, strangely enough, in Russian folklore. They go in and they kind of commune with the spirit of the bathhouse, this goblin that lives there, and he initiates them into a life of magic and debauchery.
That's great. So again, guys, there is a link to Boris's blog spot in the description. So if you guys want to check that out some more. So the priest class that you have, no weapons, no armor. Did you replace that with something?
Yeah, I kind of souped up their spell abilities. I gave them some of the spells that wizards have access to, so they can cast divine armor as opposed to mage armor, just to help them survive without armor. They have souped up channel divinity, so they have this ability based on the Trinity at first level, where if you cast a spell at one person, like command, for example, it can affect 2 other people. It can so I mean, it functions a little bit like the sorcerer's meta magic, and that helps them survive somewhat also. But also, I mean, because a lot of people respect priests and a lot of people would think twice about attacking priests, they're kind of socially protected in areas where civilized life is in effect. I mean, they go off into the woods and of course they're up against it. They also have these ceremonies that they can perform, and I was glad to see that Unearthed Arcana reintroduced the old ceremony spell. I make it a little bit different, because if for example, if you come and you confess your sins to the priest, you can gain a point of inspiration. So there's this in-game mechanic which actually allows people to accrue some sort of benefit from participating in these kinds of rituals. If the priest, baptizes a child, that child gains, advantage on its next roll or something. If he marries 2 people, they gain advantage. I think in the ceremony spell as it's written, you gain an armor class bonus, which strikes me as being a little bit strange.
Yeah. I remember us doing that on Arcana and making the jokes about, oh, we're going into a really tough dungeon right now. Hey, Paladin, do you want to marry us real quick?
Yeah, but I mean, it kind of works role-playing wise. I'm actually playing this kind of priest in my kids' game, and I'm always after people to confess. And they kind of resist for a while just because, who wants to do it? But then when they realize that they can get a point of inspiration out of it, they sort of make something up.
That's great.
But well, I wanted to ask you, because I think I talked about this briefly with Nate on some chat or some comment underneath one of your videos at some point. I remember we were... you guys are often talking about the settings that you like, the fact that you prefer Eberron to Forgotten Realms and stuff. And I remember talking to Nate about Kara-Tur and kind of all these region-specific settings that 3E and 1E used to have and that they haven't really done. Those are probably the ones that I would be most interested in playing, this kind of, Far Eastern setting or Middle Eastern. They don't have the class archetypes and various rules for people to run it, but I would definitely be into not running those settings, but being a player. I always found those as being most attractive of the published settings.
Which one are you most interested in?
I would do Kara-Tur. I would do Al-Qadim. I would probably do Mastica.
Okay. I think there's been a bunch of like Oriental style adventures released in the DMs Guild, and they're getting a lot of flack over the name in there as well. And like I understand, like they're kind of like riffing off of the old Oriental book from AD&D, which had one of the best covers ever. It was a great D&D book, but it definitely needs some revisions for the modern era.
Yeah, I mean, it needs mechanical revisions. It needs revisions as far as the name goes. But I mean, the name Oriental was dropped long ago. So, but I mean, yeah, they do have to clean it up for modern sensibilities a little bit. That's true.
Well, really, they should change it to like Wexia Adventures or something like that. That's still thematic and is a style of play that kind of speaks to the Asian culture being mixed with fantasy, the fantasy game and wire fu and all of that stuff. That would be way more acceptable.
Yeah. And I guess Al-Qadim would be 1001 Nights.
Yeah, I was thinking like running it like an Arabian Nights story would probably be the best.
Caravanserais, Flying Carpets.
In the chat, they're talking about Bollywood. Plenty of Hindu mythology to be explored.
Definitely.
Doesn't have to be Bollywood, but then Comic Book University is like, D&D, where every little thing breaks into choreographed dance.
Well, actually, that would be kind of interesting. It's like if you want to earn a point of inspiration, you have to do a dance about how, once you're through defeating all these villains and you can leave the dungeon, you can go back to your village and, marry the girl next door, and it would be really great.
The Comic Book University, the Bard would be overworked.
This is true, but the Bard would be the most powerful character class for that setting.
Absolutely. They're all special. Their performance will all be specialty in dance, though.
I just discovered this. They have all kinds of weird stuff on Netflix. So there's this, I think it's this 80-part series, which is set around the time of the creation of the first Chinese Empire, the Qin Dynasty, as it transitions to the longer-lived Han Dynasty. And it's funny because if you look at it, I guess people's mannerisms and the way that people's dress remind you a lot more of samurai settings in Japan, because I guess China used to be a much more martial country than it is. But there's a lot of source material for anyone there who wants to run a game set in something like ancient China. It's called The King's War, I think.
The Bollywood discussion that's happening in the chat reminds me of way back when my daughter was like 3 or 4, and she was very nonverbal early on. And I was like flipping through the channels, and she flipped out and freaked out on me because I had gone through like an Indian, it was an Indian station, and it had like music videos on, and she was like, "Daddy, put the princesses back on," and she was like enraptured and enamored by watching, this like Bollywood style music video.
You're lucky, because I remember I put some Indian music on in the car once. We were driving somewhere, and I had a revolt on my hands from the people in the back seat.
Oh, that music helped get me to Idaho and back when I drove.
Wow, it's probably better than most of the things that you can find on your FM or AM radio when you're taking long car trips.
Yeah, that, and it was like that and Arabic Groove was pretty good.
Yeah, that stuff is also quite good.
Yeah.
Man, I had pulled up like a topic to kind of pull out because someone had just sent it to me earlier. We never even got to it.
That's true. I forgot about it.
So apparently there's an app that's going to be, that either has been launched or will be launched, and it's kind of like a Kindle, but for D&D books, which I was kind of surprised they did, because I mean, it seems to fill the same kind of space as D&D Beyond and all the virtual tabletops. It's like Wizards of the Coast is just licensing to everybody.
Well, okay, thinking back about it, and you saying that it kind of takes that same space. Now that I think about it, D&D Beyond's like so far beyond just a Kindle version of the books that I'd have to say that there's, if you just want to carry around your books and have access to them when you want them, Kindle's probably really useful. But the database function of D&D Beyond is freaking fantastic. I was just doing spells the other day. I don't even have full access yet. I haven't got set up for that yet. But it's ridiculously good when I'm trying to just find spells and find information on it.
So, since I have you guys here, can you explain to me what exactly the function of D&D Beyond is? I mean, I've taken a look at it, and I've seen that, you can use it to generate characters and stuff, which you can also do on OrcPub and various other platforms. So, I mean, what do you find as being the most useful thing about it?
I mean, it does serve the same role as a lot of those other things. It's literally just a character builder, and as well as a database right now, right? So depending on what content you have, that's what's in there. Although like I said the other day, I've used the free version in my game the other night. But I think the real key difference is the things that are going to come down the road. Like, oh, here's a dragon turtle that's a CR, whatever the dragon turtle is, but I need it to be a 5. And you're going to be able to upgrade and downgrade. There's some campaign features in there that you can share with your party. So like that might be an interesting aspect where, like, say for someone like you who's doing a bunch of homebrew stuff, you could put it all there and then share it with your party or with your players, and they would be able to access it there.
Yeah, that would be useful. Prorating monsters in one direction or another. I would probably use that.
You can dial back that kobold, the Russian kobold.
Yeah.
But well, then you'd have proprietary issues, since I guess that's technically not Wizards.
Oh, that's true.
Well, who knows? Maybe down the road there's where they work out a deal and get some of the non-Wizards stuff in there, because Wizards doesn't own D&D Beyond.
Right.
They've licensed it.
So how good do you think Xanathar is going to be?
Xanathar's Guide?
Yeah. Depends if it has Mystic or not.
Depends on whether it has Mystic. I actually really like the Mystics. I don't really like Psionics in the game, but I thought that class was really well done.
My concern with Xanathar's Guide is it's like we're just going to get all the stuff we've been getting in Unearthed Arcana refined. Like that'll feel a little weak. I want to see something new.
They'll probably throw some bones to people who want to see something new, which is everybody. I'm wondering if they're going to have the revised Ranger in there.
I think so. I think they're finally going to crank that out.
Everyone's playing them anyway.
Yeah. I don't actually have a problem with the Hunter Ranger. I think it's fine as is.
I actually don't even have a problem with the Beastmaster Ranger, but everyone else does. So
Well, that's true. I feel like that is like a bit of a weaker option, and you have to work harder with your selection. But I guess my biggest problem with the Beast Companion is it doesn't have survivability at the higher levels. Like at 20th level, your Beast Companion can be literally one-shot it.
Yeah, but how many people play 20th level characters, and how often?
We have a dream.
Yeah.
We have a dream.
We all have dreams.
Well,
yes.
no, like I say 20th level, but it's worse at the lower levels. Okay, 10th level. Now it has 40 hit points. Yeah, so it's got less hit points than your mage, and
It's a fireball of a slap away from death.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
So like that would be my main issue.
Right.
Because you figure, what does a 10th level mage have? Like they're gonna have 40 hit. They're gonna have 42 hit points plus con. So it's even weaker than the mage. And if your mage is up front getting stomped on, like you're playing your mage wrong, probably.
Well, yeah, just have the Beast Companion hide behind the mage. Then you're gonna be fine.
Instead of Battle Cat, you have Cringer.
It's rear guard.
Exactly.
It's rear guard. It's a very important position.
Inside every Battle Cat, there's a Cringer.
That's funny. Well, we are past that time, and I'm going to have to run out of here very shortly. But I do appreciate you coming on, Boris, and even more so, like we appreciate all of our fans, but we really have a soft spot for you guys that have been around since the very beginning, and who contributed so much in the community.
Well, it was one of my players actually that turned me on to you guys like 2.5 years ago or however long it was. So I'm thankful to him for doing it, and I'm thankful for you guys for being there and putting this community together.
I think we all enjoy it when you and Mike Gould start talking back and forth, and then we're like trying to figure out, does Mike Gould normally dumb it down when in his normal comments, or does he ratchet it up when he's talking to you?
I don't know. We'll have to
get him on here.
That's right. We'll all have to talk.
Yeah, we should have you on again. We should have you on again sometime. That would be good.
I would love to do it again.
Great.
Awesome.
And thanks for plugging my blog.
No worries. I mean, you have a lot of great ideas in your head, so let's get them out there.
It deserves some love.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to thank you guys for hanging out with me today. I want to thank everyone who hung out in the chat, and everyone have a great day and stay nerdy.
Stay nerdy.
Stay nerdy.